Recently, I've been on a narrow gauge kick. I think that's fair to say. And likewise, it was pretty inevitable that at some point I would try to make my favorite narrow gauge character. That being Duncan, in an 009 scale to go alongside my other models. But I knew the job wouldn't be an easy one, unfortunately for a number of reasons. One, I knew it would have to be 3D printed, and honestly prior to this I had very little to no experience with 3D prints, let alone painting or finishing them. 2, sourcing a chassis, and 3, getting a face that was actually gonna be accurate. Those bumps aside, I was pretty determined, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll not only be talking about how I got over those, but also taking a closer look at my custom 009 Duncan, which still isn't necessarily done, but at this point a good majority of them is, so I'll count this as a part 1. And with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So like I said previously, I was very new to 3D printing. I hadn't worked with many 3D prints before this, but I knew the exact shell I was going for, and that is the Duncan Shell made by T-Doc on Shapeways, which also will be linked in the description for those interested. Huge shout out to T-Doc not only for his Duncan model, but for all of his narrow gauge models, as they're all made perfectly to scale for 009, and are all made using the original models as direct referencing, so you're getting something that's actually TVS accurate. To smooth the shell, I would use a combination of methods. First, I would use a nail file and different types of sandpaper, and then to make sure everything was right, prime it over and make sure everything was what I wanted. But unfortunately, there was some things that were still a bit hard to get to, for example the front of his cab. So I knew when I would go to detail him, I would have to go back and hide those imperfections. But once I had come down on the final priming, and let it dry for a good amount of time, I sprayed the entire model using a Tamiya spray, this being camel yellow, and then would let this dry for another good amount of time. But once it was dry, I would start work on detailing. It was also around this time the chassis came, so while we're on that subject, I'll explain that a little too. Duncan's chassis is actually a Bachmann N-Scale Percy, which as you can see has been modified and painted. The pistons were sprayed the same yellow as the body shell, and using black acrylic paint, I would paint over the green on his wheels. Unfortunately, it is a bit messy, but it did get the job done and is so small you can't really tell. As I'm sure you noticed, the body shell does ride a bit high, and that's because the chassis isn't the most perfect fit, but I don't want to risk modifying the shell itself too much, as attempting to once I actually broke my first shell. The entire back of the cab broke off. So after that I suppose I'm a bit nervous, and with time we'll either replace this or find a better way to actually fit it. I also would like to reshape his pistons to make them more TVS accurate, but that'll be something that happens later down the road. And that basically sums up his chassis. Now, with how small the shell itself was, I knew detailing it wasn't going to be easy. I'm more of a spray painter, I don't really like using brush paint, but I would have to suck it up and kinda had to with Duncan. Using the same black acrylic paint I used for his wheels, I painted under his boiler, his smoke box, his cab, and everything else that needed to be black. However, I also needed to make his buffer beams red, and this part was honestly a lot simpler than you may have thought. I took some masking tape, masked up the entire thing besides the buffer beams, reprimed them, and then resprayed them with Tamiya red spray paint. With that done, it was as simple as painting the buffers, painting the hooks, and weathering the model. He's actually weathered with the coal you see inside of his bunkers, which I know is a bit chunky and I'll likely replace here soon. But for this model, I wanted to use actual real coal. So what you're seeing in his bunkers and the dust that's found all over him is actual coal and coal dust. I used silver paint pins for his buffers, and a gold one for his side piping, and just for fun would add a Bachmann Oliver tail lamp to his backside. And with all of that done, a coat of matte clear was applied, and Duncan was for the time completed. I have name and number plates on the way for him, but unfortunately it'll be about a 5 to 6 month delivery time, so I'm kinda stuck in that department, and I'd like to add his lining at some point, but I need to figure out the proper method to do it, so for now this'll do. But keep in mind this isn't him finished, he still has a little bit more to go. And speaking of, we haven't mentioned his face yet, which to me is honestly one of the best parts. I knew the face would have to be a custom, and the one you see that's actually on Duncan is made by Rexecutions. The face was designed by him and then resin printed by Thomas Tank Merch, where they then were sent off to Bold Out 95 to be painted. I was so amazed when I actually got the faces in the mail. I didn't only just get a Duncan face, I also got a Rusty one, and my gosh guys, they are so small. But once that arrived, Duncan was, well, more or less complete, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is where I met with him right now. Just like the actual Duncan, he is a bit of a rock and roller, and at times the motor can be a bit skippy. But once he gets going, and this has to be one of my favorite customs that I've ever made.
Fancy not securing your freight cars on a hill? They'll come back to spook you and your special funnel. Woo!
I'm a plain, blunt engine. I speak as I find. Tunnels should be tunnels and not rabbit holes. This railway is no good at all.
Really quick, I want to give a shout out to my patrons, as the people on my Patreon got to see Duncan a little early, and another huge thank you to everyone who's helped me get Duncan where he is now. He still has a bit to go, so like I said, expect to see more of this guy. But for now, I have to say I'm pretty satisfied, and hopefully you guys enjoyed taking a look at this guy too.
What's that about me? I'm a plain engine, and I believe in plain speaking. Speak up!
If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for even more train content. There's always more stuff on the way. And as always, guys, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Send Rusty packing! Send Rusty packing! Snorted Duncan.